It was a spring day in Israel when Jesus of Nazareth approached Jerusalem riding on a donkey. The city was packed with residents and travelers visiting the temple and preparing for the upcoming feast of unleavened bread. As word of Jesus' arrival spread, crowds gathered. The people had heard about this man who performed miracles and had even raised someone from the dead. Could this be the Messiah, the one they hoped would free them from the Romans? As Jesus' donkey took the first steps into the city, the crowd covered the ground in palm leaves, an honor usually reserved for a conquering king to protect him from the dust their animals' hooves might kick up. The people waved palm leaves as well, shouting, "Hosanna!" or in other words, "Save us now, we pray." This was the first and last time in Jesus' mortal life that he received the public honor of a king he rightly deserved. The next day, Jesus went to the temple, the place in all of Israel that was supposed to be the most holy and the place in which God could dwell. What he found filled him with righteous anger. In the outer court, money changers and vendors were overcharging travelers for sacrificial animals. Their bargaining and the sounds of the animals creating an atmosphere of greed and chaos at the edge of the temple grounds. With indignation, Jesus overturned the tables of the money changers, sending their coins rolling across the ground. He drove out the vendors with their animals and loudly proclaimed, "My house shall be called the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves." Likely drawn by the sounds of tables falling, animals bawling, and people shouting, church officials came to see what Jesus was doing. Here again was the man they had already heard so much about, the man whose teachings and miracles were such a threat to their authority. And now he had come into the temple, into the area they were in charge of, and taken over how it should be operated. The rulers must have been seething as they watched Jesus calmly move from this moment of righteous indignation to gently healing the blind and lame who approached him. This Jesus of Nazareth was a threat they could no longer ignore. They needed to get rid of him. But how? Though Jesus knew the outrage that filled the scribes, Pharisees, and Sadducees, it didn't stop him from visiting the temple again the next morning. Now the religious leaders thought was their chance to find a just cause to arrest Jesus. They began questioning him. By what authority did he teach? Was it right to pay tribute to the Romans? To whom would a woman be married in the afterlife if she had had 7 husbands in a row who had died? What is the greatest commandment? Though the officials waited with bated breath for Jesus to trip in his words, speak blasphemy, or make any kind of error, he answered them calmly and with wisdom that left them so dumbfounded they didn't dare ask him any more questions. But oh, how their hearts filled with rage as Jesus criticized them. "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones and of all uncleanness." For a group of men whose ritual cleanness, adherence to Mosaic law, and social status were of the utmost importance, this public rebuke could not go unpunished. Jesus left the infuriated church leaders and walked to the nearby Mount of Olives where, with those who truly believed in him, he shared the profound teachings of the 10 virgins, the talents, and the sheep and the goats. But while he was gone from their presence, Jesus was not gone from the thoughts and plotting of the Jewish authorities. They were desperate to get rid of Jesus, but they feared a public riot if they acted while he was surrounded by the crowds that had gathered for the upcoming feast. If they were to take Jesus while he was in Jerusalem, they had to accomplish it before Friday, when the feast would begin and even more people would arrive. As they pondered the difficulty of getting Jesus alone when he was constantly surrounded by followers, they were approached by a surprising ally, one of Jesus' disciples, Judas. Judas came to them with a promise that he could deliver Jesus into their hands away from the crowds, and he would do it all for just 30 silver coins, the cost of a slave. The officials agreed to the bargain, and Judas left, likely in constant search of an opportunity to betray Jesus. And yet the opportunity would not have presented itself that Wednesday night nor on Thursday if Jesus remained among the crowds in Jerusalem. The city was packed as families brought lambs to the temple for sacrifice in preparation for the Passover meal. Judas must have been anxious to get Jesus alone, or to know the place where Jesus would at least be mostly alone during the Passover meal. And yet Jesus didn't reveal the location of the upcoming Passover meal to any of his disciples. Instead, as Thursday night approached, he sent Peter and John to find a man carrying water, which would be an unusual sight since that was a woman's chore. And that man would lead them to a room ready for their Passover meal. When Jesus and his 12 disciples gathered in the upper room, the meal had an uncustomarily solemn tone. Each of these men had participated in the Passover every year of his life. They had honored and remembered how Israel's God had saved his people from the final plague of the Egyptians and brought them out of captivity. But this meal felt different. It likely felt even more solemn, more serious when, after the meal, Jesus began to prepare to wash his disciples' feet, a job customarily done by a servant. What does this mean? They must have wondered. He then prepared the first sacrament for them, explaining what it meant, though the disciples didn't seem to quite understand. And then Jesus instructed Judas, "That which thou doest, do quickly." And Judas left the room with those prophetic words in his ears to find the chief priests and betray Jesus. Jesus then taught, prayed with his faithful disciples, and ended the evening with a hymn before heading to Gethsemane. At the garden's entrance, he left 8 disciples behind, taking Peter, James, and John further in. Then, leaving them, he walked totally alone further into the garden and suffered for the sins and pains of the world. As Jesus was in the midst of his suffering, Judas went to the chief priests to let them know the time had come. With both temple and Roman guards, he led the way toward Jesus. He likely first searched the house where he'd left Jesus and his disciples, and then led the soldiers to the Mount of Olives, knowing Jesus often went there. As the Savior finished praying, he saw Judas approaching with soldiers. But rather than run or gather others to help them fight, Jesus waited calmly for what he knew was coming. Judas approached and greeted Jesus with a kiss, the agreed-upon sign to reveal who Jesus was to the soldiers. This subtle sign, which was a common way to greet a friend, might have been planned to keep Judas's part in the betrayal secret. But Jesus knew his heart and asked, "Betrayest thou the Son of Man with a kiss?" Rather than seizing Jesus, the soldiers hesitated. Jesus stepped forward and asked whom they sought. When they answered Jesus of Nazareth, he replied, "I am he." At his words, they fell back in fear. But regaining courage, the officers moved in. Peter, impulsive as ever, drew his sword and cut off a soldier's ear. Amidst the man's agonized groans, Jesus stepped forward and with a simple touch and a few words healed the man completely. Despite seeing this miracle for themselves, the soldiers bound Jesus and took him to the Jewish high priest Caiaphas in the early hours of Friday for his first trial. The high priest and others questioned Jesus, trying to catch him in some error of the law. But despite their shouts, their insults, and their efforts at intimidation, he remained calm and silent. Finally, when they questioned him about being the Son of God, Jesus affirmed it. The high priest tore his robes in pretended outrage, but to his delight, he now had a crime of which he could accuse Jesus: blasphemy, a crime worthy of death. Hurriedly, a second trial was convened by the Sanhedrin. They knew they had to act quickly to meet the legal requirement that a death penalty criminal have 2 trials before being sentenced. This second trial, filled with those who hated Jesus and his threat to their authority, confirmed that they found Jesus worthy of death. Now it was time to get Rome to agree to meting out the punishment of death. The Jewish rulers knew that the Romans wouldn't care about a criminal accused of blasphemy. And so when Jesus was taken to the Roman governor Pontius Pilate and the Galilean ruler Herod Antipas, he was charged with a crime the Romans would care about: treason. Still, neither man found Jesus to be treasonous. By this time in the morning, a crowd had gathered outside Pilate's palace, and he brought Jesus in front of them. He told the crowd that he could find no fault in him. And yet the crowd, likely filled with angry religious leaders, demanded Jesus' crucifixion. Pontius, whose political standing with Rome was tenuous and could not withstand an uprising by the Jews, relented to their demands and handed Jesus over to the Roman soldiers. These soldiers, who seemed to take great delight in inflicting their anger with the Jews on their prisoners, flogged Jesus, stripped him, and forced him to carry his cross toward Golgotha. Weakened from Gethsemane and the beatings, Jesus collapsed along the way, and a Roman soldier grabbed a man named Simon from the crowd and forced him to carry Jesus' cross. At 9 a.m., Jesus' hands, wrists, and feet were nailed to the cross, and his body raised up for others to walk past and see in a favored form of Roman humiliation. Above him was written his charge: the King of the Jews. The earth shook, darkness covered the land, and after 6 hours of agony, Jesus died. At that moment, the temple veil was torn. The promised Messiah had died. How bleak that Friday afternoon must have felt. Normally, as a criminal, Jesus' body would have been placed in a public burial site, but a wealthy follower of Jesus named Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for Jesus' body. With Nicodemus, Joseph prepared and buried Jesus quickly, just before the Sabbath. Pilate then ordered guards to secure the tomb, sealing it with a stone. That Sabbath day, while Jesus' body lay in the tomb, he was hard at work in the spirit world. He appeared to the spirits of the just, including Adam, Eve, Noah, Abraham, and Moses, confirming that the day of their resurrection was coming after his own. He prepared, commissioned, and organized these faithful spirits to do a great work, preaching the gospel to those spirits who were wicked or who had never heard it. Meanwhile, Jesus' disciples and other followers in Jerusalem honored the Jewish Sabbath and did not visit his grave. They privately mourned the loss of their rabbi, their friend, their Messiah. Early Sunday morning, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, Salome, and other women went to the tomb to properly prepare Jesus' body, as Nicodemus and Joseph had been rushed. These women discovered that the tomb was empty. Angels appeared to them and asked them why they sought the living among the dead. They ran to tell Peter and then John, who came and also saw the empty tomb. Appearing now as a resurrected being, Christ first showed himself to Mary Magdalene. He told her to go and tell the others the amazing news of that Easter morning. He had risen. So what is the lesson we can learn from this Easter story? One lesson is that even though wicked men may conspire against that which is good, Jesus will always win in the end. So make sure you're on his team.